My name is Marjorie Hensley. I'm 67 years old. That morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds in long, golden stripes across my kitchen table. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. I'd been marking travel brochures with a blue pen. Yellowstone, Glacier, places I'd promised myself I'd see once I finally retired. After 35 years of teaching other people's children, I thought I'd earned a little quiet. The phone rang just as I was circling a photograph of a mountain lake. Lydia's name flashed on the screen. "Hi?" "Mom," she said, her voice brisk, the kind she used when she was already somewhere else. "I wanted to let you know Ben and I are heading to Sedona for a wellness retreat. 2 weeks. We need the break." I smiled into the receiver. "That sounds lovely. Who's watching the kids?" A pause, sharp and deliberate. "You are. I'll drop them off tomorrow morning." I pressed my thumb against the counter, leaving a small crescent mark in the wood. "Tomorrow, you don't do anything anymore," she said, light as if it were fact, not insult. "It'll be good for you to have company." The line went quiet. I could hear faint laughter in the background, her friends. Probably already planning spa days. I told her fine, I'd be ready, and hung up before my voice could betray me. The kitchen felt smaller somehow. The clock ticked too loudly. Outside, the marsh grass swayed in the wind, and a heron moved through the shallow water with slow, deliberate steps. I stood there, watching it glide, the insult still echoing in my chest. "You don't do anything anymore." I whispered the words again, but this time they sounded different, steady, not broken. Then I poured out the cold coffee, rinsed the cup, and said quietly to the empty room, "We'll see." The next morning, I made a list on a yellow pad and underlined one line twice. Teach respect again. The house always spoke in small sounds, the sigh of the old floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind through the cracked window frame. I'd lived in it for 40 years, long enough to know every creak by name. As I moved from room to room with a dustcloth in hand, it felt less like cleaning and more like reacquainting myself with an old friend. Frank built this house the year Ben was born. He'd laid every plank himself, humming under his breath, his hands always smelling of pine and seawater. After he passed, I promised myself I'd keep the place the way he left it, solid, warm, and honest. But time had a way of slipping past, and the quiet had grown heavier since Ben married Lydia. I stopped by the mantel and ran my fingers along a row of framed photographs, Ben in his graduation robe, Frank holding a fishing rod, me in a classroom full of children. There was a line between those pictures, a thin thread of years spent holding everything together. Ben used to call every Sunday. Lately, the calls came less often, rushed, distracted. Lydia's voice sometimes in the background, directing, deciding, owning. He sounded smaller each time. I straightened the frames, picked up my cleaning cloth again, and opened the window facing the marsh. The air smelled of salt and mud, and the tide was rolling in. Slow but certain, somewhere out there, a heron lifted its wings and vanished into the mist. On the kitchen counter lay a blank page of my journal. I uncapped my pen, hesitated, then wrote the words that had been forming since yesterday. Teach respect again. I underlined them twice, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper, and closed the book with quiet certainty. The lesson would begin soon enough. The next morning broke pale and cool, the kind of Charleston dawn that carries both salt and stillness. I had already set the table with bowls, fruit, and toast when the sound of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. Lydia's white SUV appeared, gleaming even in the early light. She stepped out in oversized sunglasses and perfume that lingered in the air, Her nails matched her phone case soft coral, polished and expensive. Evan's allergic to dairy. Nora won't eat anything green. And please no old music, she said, sliding open the back door. 2 sleepy faces emerged. Evan, 12, with his earbuds still in, and Nora, 9, clutching a tablet like a shield. Lydia barely glanced at them before adding, "They've got their routines. Don't mess it up." Then she leaned forward, kissed the air near my cheek, and smiled a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I'll text when I'm back," she said, and the SUV disappeared down the drive before I could answer. The house fell silent again, except for the clicking of Nora's game and the faint thump of bass leaking from Evan's headphones. I watched them settle on the couch, both absorbed in their screens. Strangers in my living room. Wi-Fi password. Evan asked without looking up. "Earn it," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. He frowned. "Mom says we don't have to earn stuff. Then she and I run different houses." For a while, neither spoke. The marsh wind rattled the window panes, and I returned to the kitchen. The smell of toast, long gone cold. At dinner, I served roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, but they pushed food around their plates. Nora wrinkled her nose. "We usually order sushi. Then this will be new for you," I said. Evan rolled his eyes. Nora sighed like an actress in a bad play. I let the silence stretch, calm and unbroken, until they both looked uncertain for the first time all day. When the dishes were cleared, I wiped the table, turned off the light, and said simply, "Good night." Then I closed my door and listened to the house settle, patient as the tide waiting to turn. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the faint hiss of wind moving through the marsh reeds. I had been lying awake for hours, the kind of sleeplessness that comes not from restlessness, but from listening, waiting for the house to speak. Then I heard it soft, muffled sobs coming from down the hall. I slipped out of bed and followed the sound to the guest room. The door was slightly open, the light from the hallway spilling across the carpet. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, a blanket pulled around her shoulders. In her small hands, she held a photograph faded at the corners. It was of her as a baby, bundled in a pink blanket, my younger face smiling beside her. I hadn't seen that picture in years. Lydia must have kept it hidden somewhere. Nora wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Mom says you made Dad miserable," she whispered. I sat beside her, the mattress dipping slightly under my weight. "Sometimes people say cruel things when they're unhappy with themselves," I said softly. "Your dad was never miserable because of love." She didn't answer, but her small fingers brushed the edge of the photo again and again, tracing it, as if trying to remember something she wasn't sure she had lived. "Try to get some sleep, sweetheart," I murmured, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "Tomorrow will be better." The next morning, I rose early and pulled out my old griddle pan, the kitchen filled with the smell of butter and batter, warm and familiar. I poured shapespears, rabbits, uneven hearts, and listened to the sizzle. When Nora walked in, her hair tangled, her eyes still red, she stopped and stared. "Are those animals?" "Depends on how kind you are to the cook," I said, flipping one that looked more like a lopsided cat. She laughed a short, surprised sound and sat down at the table. Evan followed a moment later, pretending not to be interested but watching closely as I placed the plate in front of her. For the first time since they'd arrived, the silence broke not with screens or orders, but with laughter that felt alive again. It happened by accident. Evan had left his tablet on the kitchen counter while he ran outside to chase the neighbor's cat. The screen was still glowing when I picked it up to move it. A new message popped open, Lydia's name at the top, a string of heart emojis beneath it. I didn't mean to read. But then I saw the photo, a beachfront condo, all glass and white furniture, captioned "Our place soon." Below it, a message from someone named Ryan, already transferred from Ben's account. "You're amazing, babe. Miami's waiting." My hand went cold. I set the tablet down and stood still for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator loud as thunder. Ben's account. My son's name. His money. That night, I poured myself tea but couldn't drink it. The spoon clinked against the cup. Steady and sharp. The only sound in the house. Evan and Nora were asleep upstairs. The air smelled faintly of rain. I reached for my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found one I hadn't used in years. Caroline Pierce. I said when she answered, "It's Marjorie. I need your help." Caroline had been a paralegal before she retired, a precise woman with the patience of stone and a mind like a filing cabinet. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Document everything, quietly. If she's moving money under Ben's name, you'll need proof before you show him." The next morning, I drove into town under gray clouds. The bank smelled of paper and cold air conditioning. Behind the counter was Amanda Holt, one of my former students, now a clerk. She smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Hensley." It's been years, I smiled back, though my stomach churned. "Amanda, I need to check something discreetly. If possible, within minutes." She confirmed what I feared: withdrawals, transfers, accounts linked to Lydia's name, all under Ben's authorization, at least on paper. "Do you want me to print these?" she whispered. "Yes, please." When I returned home, I spread the pages across the dining table. Numbers and dates blurred together. But one thing was clear. Lydia wasn't just careless. She was calculated. I gathered the papers, placed them in a plain manila folder, and wrote 3 words on the front in neat block letters. "For Ben." Then I closed it gently, as if sealing away both proof and heartbreak. Ben arrived just after sunset, his work boots heavy on the porch. Through the screen door, I could see the slump in his shoulders, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come only from labor, but from life wearing a man down grain by grain. His hands were still streaked with grease from the factory. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded, lowering himself into the chair by the kitchen table. I poured 2 cups, black, the way he liked it when he was younger. Before Lydia began telling him it was bad for his heart, we sat for a moment, listening to the low hum of cicadas outside. Then I reached across the table and slid the folder toward him. "You should read this." He looked at me, puzzled, then flipped it open. The papers whispered against each other: bank statements, transfer receipts, a photo of the condo that had been sitting like a stone in my chest since yesterday. I watched his face change as the meaning unfolded. Curiosity first, then confusion, then a slow, spreading disbelief. She said it was tuition money. He muttered, finally. "For Miami," I said softly. He pressed his palms against his forehead. Staring at the table, I didn't want to see it. "You see it now." The clock ticked on the wall. For a while, neither of us spoke. I thought of the boy he'd been: bright, gentle, always looking for approval. He had found a woman who took that goodness and turned it into silence. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes, not anger yet, but the beginning of it. The kind that comes from waking up after years of pretending not to know. "What do we do?" he asked. "We start small," I said. "Call Caroline. Protect the children. Wait until she comes back." He nodded slowly. Outside, thunder rolled far off over the marsh, low and steady, as if the storm were listening in. For the first time in years, my son looked like himself again, not the man worn down by someone else's rules, but the one who might finally learn to stand on his own. The air that afternoon felt heavy enough to touch. Charleston summers always carried that thick stillness before a storm, when the marsh outside the porch darkened, and even the birds went quiet. I had opened every window, but the house still held its breath. The papers lay spread across the kitchen table, photos, messages, bank records, all waiting like witnesses. Ben stood by the counter, his hands clasped, his jaw tight. He hadn't spoken much all day, only nodded when I asked if he was ready. He was wearing his work shirt, the name patch slightly crooked, as if he'd rushed home. Then the sound came, the crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of a car door. Lydia's voice, bright and careless, carried through the humid air. "Mom, we're back," she called, though the children weren't with her. A moment later, she appeared at the doorway, pulling a designer suitcase behind her, sunglasses pushed up on her head. Her skin was tanned, her hair freshly styled, her smile wide until she saw Ben. "Ben," she said lightly, the edges of her voice tightening. "You're home early." He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the table. She followed his gaze and froze. The color drained from her face as she recognized what lay there. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling before it sharpened. "You went through my things. You snooped. You and your controlling mother always meddling, always judging." I stayed seated, hands folded on the table. "Lower your voice, Lydia. The children are finally listening." Evan and Nora were standing in the hallway, silent, their eyes wide. Lydia turned toward them, her tone switching instantly to sweet. "Kids, Grandma's confused. Dad and I are just talking." Ben's hand came down on the table, not hard, but final. No more talking. "Lydia." The front door opened again. Caroline stepped inside, calm and steady, her leather folder in hand. "Mrs. Hensley," she said politely to Lydia, "you can sign these papers now, or you can face them in court next week. It's your choice." "What papers?" Lydia snapped. "Legal acknowledgement of the financial transfers," Caroline said, "and an agreement to relinquish control of Ben's accounts until the investigation concludes." Lydia laughed, high and brittle. "You think you can scare me? You two are pathetic. I'll call my lawyer." Ben spoke quietly, but his voice carried more weight than any shout. "Your lawyer already did. He told you not to go near my accounts again. He told you to come home and face this." For a long moment, no one moved. The air outside shifted, the first drops of rain tapping against the windows. Lydia looked at the children, then at me, her expression cracking. "You turned him against me," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." Carolyn set the pen on the table. The thunder rolled over the marsh, deep and slow. Lydia's hand shook as she signed her name. When she finally left, the air felt lighter. Rain began to fall in steady sheets, washing over the porch, the sound like applause from the storm itself. Ben sat down heavily, his eyes wet, his shoulders trembling, not with fear this time, but relief. Outside, the sky opened, and the house began to breathe again. The weeks that followed felt like the house had learned to breathe again. Lydia's perfume was gone, her sharp voice replaced by the hum of ordinary life, the clatter of dishes, the scrape of chairs on the kitchen floor, the quiet rhythm of something mending itself. Ben stayed, at first to get things in order, but his duffel bag never left the corner of the guest room. Evan and Nora began their own small routines. Evan doing homework at the dining table, Nora feeding the stray cat that had started visiting the porch. There was no schedule, no rush, only the slow, patient return of trust. Each morning, I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and watched the mist rise from the marsh. The house, once too quiet, now carried the soft music of family again, Ben's low laughter, the sound of Nora's pencil tapping, Evan's voice asking how long to boil pasta. Small sounds, but they filled the rooms like sunlight. One afternoon, I pinned a notice to the board at the corner store: free art lessons for kids, Thursdays at the Marsh House. By the next week, a handful of neighborhood children arrived with sketchbooks and shy smiles. We painted shells, wildflowers, and the herons that drifted over the water. Their laughter reminded me of my classroom years ago, and for the first time, I didn't miss that life. I was living it again. Only quieter, truer. Ben helped around the house, fixing the railing, patching the roof Frank once built. Some evenings, he and the children sat on the porch while I finished cleaning up after class. Fireflies blinked in the reeds, their glow mirrored in the slow-moving water. One night, he called me outside. The table was set with simple food: roast chicken, salad, biscuits still warm from the oven. The children were already seated, grinning. "To Mom," Ben said, raising his glass of iced tea, who reminded us what home means. I felt my throat tighten. The light from the kitchen spilled across the porch, catching the silver in my hair. Nora squeezed my hand. "No more leftovers," I said softly. "Only fresh beginnings." We ate together as the marsh shimmered under the fireflies' glow. The tide was rising, slow and sure, carrying everything old away with it. For the first time in years, the house didn't echo, it sang.